It was a Tuesday I'll never forget. Pouring rain, streets glistening under street lamps, and my shoes soaking through before I even reached the office door. And then I saw it. A bassinet. Right there, sitting against the door frame of my office, rain pooling around its base. Inside, my son, swaddled in a blanket that still carried the faint, unmistakable scent of her perfume. His tiny fist curled and uncurled in the air, unaware that his whole life, our whole life, had just been ripped apart. Tucked inside that blanket was one thing: a folded slip of paper. 3 words: "He's your problem." That was the moment I stopped being a husband and became something else entirely. I didn't know it yet, but this was the day that would ignite a slow-burning fire in me, one that would smolder for 10 long years before it finally erupted. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone walk away from you like you were disposable? And don't forget, hit subscribe and like this video so you don't miss how this story ends, because trust me, you're going to want to hear it. 2 days after that rainy doorstep, her parents came knocking. They didn't ask about him. They didn't offer help. They stood there in designer scarves and gold watches, with eyes sharp enough to slice me open. "She's gone," her mother said flatly. "We don't know where. He's your burden now. Don't call us." Then they turned and walked away, like they were brushing lint off their coats. And that was it. No explanation, no kindness, just a slammed door and silence that lasted for a decade. But here's the thing about silence. People think it's empty. It's not. It's where plans are born, and where revenge begins to breathe. And they had no idea. I'd been keeping a record since the day she left. The years after she left weren't loud. They were relentless. Early mornings before the sun rose, making him breakfast while I packed his school lunch. Evenings spent at the kitchen table, my welding gloves tossed aside, helping him trace multiplication tables. Nights where I worked until my eyes burned, just to keep the lights on, praying he wouldn't notice how thin the grocery bags were getting. They didn't see that. They didn't see the fevered nights when I sat by his bed, counting every shallow breath. They didn't see the Saturdays at the park, the wobbly first attempts at riding a bike, or the scraped knees I kissed better. And they definitely didn't see the way he grew. Bright, sharp, stubborn, a living, breathing contradiction to every bet they placed against me. In their minds, I had been a temporary inconvenience, a placeholder until she came back to claim him. But in reality, I was building something they could never understand trust. The kind that doesn't break when a door slams shut. I never told my son what she'd done. I never told him what her parents had said to my face. Instead, I gave him the life they didn't think I could provide. And while I was doing that, I was also building something else. Something I kept locked away in a box that I never opened unless I was alone. It started the night she left. When I found her phone, still logged into her accounts, I didn't scroll out of curiosity. I scrolled with purpose. Emails, bank transfers, hotel bookings, names saved only as first initials. And the kicker, payments from her parents to someone with a criminal record, buried under fake invoices. I didn't take it to the police. Not yet. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't rushed. It's patient. It's precise. By the time 10 years had passed, I had something stronger than anger. I had proof. Proof that could burn down the entire facade they'd built. And then, one crisp morning, it arrived. A cream-colored envelope. Petition for custody. They wanted him. After a decade of silence, they suddenly wanted my son. What they didn't know was that they weren't walking into a custody battle. They were walking straight into the trap I'd been building for 10 years. The day of the hearing, the courthouse felt colder than usual. Not the kind of cold you feel in your bones, but the kind that comes from eyes watching you, judging you. They were already there when I walked in. Her parents, pristine, polished, sitting with their high-priced attorneys like royalty holding court. Silk scarves, tailored suits, eyes that scanned the room not for truth, but for control. My son was down the hall, in the waiting room with a court-appointed volunteer, drawing superheroes. He had no idea his grandparents were trying to erase me. I intended to keep it that way. Their lawyers started strong, painting me as a bitter man who had maliciously kept their grandson from them. He spoke of family bonds, of a child's right to know his heritage, of my supposed vendetta. Every word was rehearsed, every pause calculated, and I let him talk. Because speeches don't matter when you already know you've won. When it was my turn, I didn't start with a rebuttal. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my briefcase and slid a thick, sealed folder across the table to the judge. Years of work. Years of quiet nights, gathering pieces that didn't look dangerous until you saw them all together. The judge opened it. Read the first page, then the second. By the third, his eyebrows rose. He leaned back in his chair, the silence stretching so far you could hear the paper crinkle in his hands. His eyes lifted to mine. "Do they even know what you have?" he asked quietly. I shook my head once. He kept reading. 10 minutes passed. No one moved. The air in the room shifted sharp, heavy, electric. Finally, he closed the file. "This is deeply troubling." He turned to their lawyer, voice flat but edged with warning. "I strongly suggest your clients reconsider their petition. Proceeding may expose them to significant legal consequences." Her parents didn't move. Her mother's hand tightened around her pearls. Her father whispered something harsh. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw fear in their eyes. The judge's question still hung in the air when her father finally spoke. "We withdraw." 2 words, clipped and bitter, like they were being dragged out of his throat. The gavel didn't even need to fall. Their lawyers started packing up instantly, avoiding my eyes like my very existence was a contagion. Her parents stood, their movements stiff, the kind of stiffness that comes from trying not to look rattled. As they walked past, her mother's eyes flicked to the folder in my hands. She looked at it the way people look at unexploded bombs, terrified of what might happen if it went off. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence follow them out into the hallway. When I stepped outside, my son came running toward me, his drawing flapping in his hands. "It's us," he said proudly. In the picture, I was wearing a cape. We walked to the car together, my hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of what had just happened, but also the weight of what I was still holding back. Because here's the thing about leverage. Once you have it, you don't waste it all in one shot. You let them stew in the uncertainty of what you might do next. You let their own imagination work against them. And it was already working. That night, my phone lit up first with a text from an unknown number, then another, then a string of missed calls. They didn't say sorry. They didn't say they were wrong. They wanted to talk. They wanted to fix things. But it wasn't about fixing anything. It was about making sure I didn't open the rest of that folder. I ignored them, because the longer I stayed silent, the louder their panic would get. And I knew this was just the first crack. The real collapse was coming. I didn't respond to a single call, text, or voicemail. Not because I was busy, but because silence is the loudest answer you can give to people who expect you to grovel. 3 days after the courtroom, I noticed the first ripple. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot from Noel's social media. The eviction video she'd proudly posted, the one where she framed herself as some sort of hero for saving my son from me, was gone. Deleted. Scrubbed, like it had never happened. But the internet never forgets. Clips were already circulating in places she couldn't control, re-uploaded by strangers, stitched into reaction videos, shared in group chats. And the comments. They weren't on her side anymore. People had started digging. Someone found old posts that didn't line up with the story she'd told. Another person remembered seeing her with her mother outside a hotel the same week she'd claimed she was in another country. By the end of the week, Noel had lost over 5,000 followers. 2 of her sponsors quietly pulled out. One even left a comment, polite but public, about aligning with creators whose values reflect our brand. Her father's business took a hit too. Turns out, one of his biggest clients, saw one of those re-uploaded clips. The deal they'd been finalizing? Gone. Overnight. And just like that, his smiling pillar of the community image had a fracture running straight down the middle. Then came the bank trouble. Apparently, one of his loan applications got flagged during a routine review. The trust, my trust, showed up in the records. And suddenly, the bank wanted answers about how loans had been approved without my signature. The panic was no longer quiet. It was public. It was costly. And through it all, I didn't lift a finger. I didn't make a single post or send a single message. I just let the truth they'd buried for a decade rise up on its own. Because sometimes revenge isn't about the blow you deliver. It's about letting them choke on the mess they created. And the mess was only getting deeper. They were about to find out. I wasn't done. The email from their lawyer came in on a Tuesday morning. I opened it slowly, almost savoring the anticipation. The proposal was laughable. They offered to transfer the lake cabin entirely into my name if I agreed to drop all claims for unpaid rent and to forfeit my share of the commercial property's income. It was bait. Pretty bait, sure full of nostalgic value and sunny childhood memories, but still bait. The cabin was worth maybe a third of what they owed me. They thought I'd bite, because it came wrapped in sentimental history. But I wasn't after scraps. I wanted acknowledgement, and I wanted it in a form they couldn't twist later. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Dorsey the next morning. We sat in his oak-paneled office, sunlight streaming through the blinds, the faint ticking of the wall clock marking every decision I made. I told him exactly what I wanted: a formal payment plan for the entire unpaid rent amount, a third-party property management company to handle the commercial building going forward, with profits split fairly, a written admission signed by all four of them acknowledging their financial misrepresentation and my legal share in all properties. No verbal promises. No handshake deals. Ink on paper. Mr. Dorsey's pen scratched across his legal pad as I spoke. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "Then that's what we'll demand." We sent the counteroffer that same afternoon, and while negotiations crawled through formalities, I began to notice something. Their cracks were showing. Noel had stopped posting completely. Her father's business was running quieter than usual. My mother's number had tried calling 3 times in a single day, blocked every time. They'd started this game thinking they held all the cards. Now, they were just trying to keep the table from collapsing. And I hadn't even played my final move yet. It was a Thursday evening, just after sunset, when I heard the first knock. Sharp, impatient, followed by a low murmur of voices outside my door. I muted the television and checked the security camera feed on my phone. There they were, all 4 of them. My mother clutching a tissue, her face set in an expression halfway between grief and performance. My father with arms crossed, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the door like he could burn through it. Griffin leaning against the wall, scanning the hallway as if he owned it. And Noel half watching the door, half scrolling on her phone, probably hoping for some drama worth streaming. "Callista." My mother's voice cracked, almost believable. "Please, honey, we just want to talk. This has all gotten out of hand." My father stepped forward. "Open the door. You're acting like a child." From somewhere behind them, Griffin muttered something I couldn't catch. Noel didn't even look up. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting the discomfort build, letting them feel just a fraction of the weight they'd tried to dump on me. Then, clearly enough for the mic to pick up, I spoke. "All future communication goes through Mr. Dorsey. You've already been informed of this." They hadn't expected me to respond at all. The pause on the other side of the door was almost satisfying. "Now, you don't have to do this." My mother tried again, her tone shifting to coaxing. "We can work it out. Just the 5 of us. We'll delete the videos. We'll fix it." I watched Noelle glance at her phone and tuck it behind her back. She wasn't here for peace. She was here for content. "I'm not discussing anything without legal representation," I said. "If you remain here, I'll contact building security." My father's voice sharpened, slicing through the air. "So, now you're hiding behind lawyers?" You told me I wasn't your daughter, remember? They stood there for another minute. Then, without a word, they turned and left. I didn't exhale until the hallway was empty. And then, with deliberate calm, I locked the deadbolt and opened my laptop. An email from Mr. Dorsey was waiting. Subject line: Settlement negotiation. Initial draft. It was time to set the price for their piece. 2 days after their little hallway performance, their attorney emailed Mr. Dorsey. I read the message twice, just to be sure I understood the insult. They were offering me full ownership of the lake cabin if I agreed to drop all claims on the unpaid rent and any future income from the commercial building. Mr. Dorsey didn't even blink. "We reject," he typed back, fingers steady over the keyboard. "And we restate our original terms." The cabin was worth less than a third of what they owed me. They thought I'd take the bait, desperate for peace and some symbolic hand-me-down. But I wasn't interested in symbolism. I wanted acknowledgement. The next morning, I sat in Mr. Dorsey's office and laid it out plain. I want a formal payment plan for the unpaid rent, a third-party property management company to oversee all future income, and a written admission of financial misrepresentation, signed by all 4 of them. Mr. Dorsey leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then that's what we'll demand." While negotiations crawled, the cracks in their perfect image began to spread. Noelle's follower count dropped by over 5,000 inch a single week. Someone from high school had recognized me in her eviction livestream and started posting receipts, timestamps, commentary, context she hadn't wanted the internet to know. Sponsors quietly disappeared. She deleted the eviction video, but the internet never forgets. Dad's business took a hit too. A major client pulled out of a project after seeing a clip of him kicking my belongings across the lawn. Then a loan application got flagged for ownership irregularities. The trust surfaced in the bank's review. Suddenly, they weren't just fighting me, they were fighting the institutions that had once backed them. Mom stopped texting altogether. Griffin sent one furious email that Mr. Dorsey forwarded without comment. Noel tried calling twice. I didn't answer. When their lawyer finally responded, the tone had changed. Less aggressive, more careful. They agreed to everything: monthly payments, third-party oversight, and a written acknowledgement of what they'd done. It wasn't just a win. It was proof they'd finally realized this wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. The final draft landed in my inbox on a rainy Tuesday morning. Pages and pages of legal language, but every single word meant one thing. They'd given up. I read it slowly, making sure nothing slipped through. Monthly payments, locked in. Third-party oversight mandatory. Full written acknowledgement of financial misrepresentation signed by all 4 of them. But there was one more thing. Something small, but sharp enough to sting every time they thought about me. Just above my signature line, I added a single sentence. Truth isn't betrayal. It's what happens when the performance ends. I slid the papers back across Mr. Dorsey's desk, and he smiled in that subtle, lawyerly way that says, checkmate. 2 days later, we met in a sterile conference room at their attorney's office. They were already seated when I walked in, Mom with her tissue clutched like a stage prop, Dad with his jaw locked so tight I could see the muscle twitch, Noel scrolling her phone, and Griffin staring at the table like it had personally wronged him. No one spoke. Their lawyer handed the agreement to each of them in turn. Pen scratched paper. They didn't look at me, didn't dare, but I could feel the weight of their glances from the corner of their eyes. When it was my turn, I signed with deliberate care, pressing the pen so hard the letters almost carved into the page. It was done. They slid the copies into folders and pushed them to the center of the table. I took mine, stood up, and for a moment, I just let the silence sit, let them taste what they had built. On my way out, I caught Noel's gaze. She looked away first. The rain had stopped when I stepped outside, but the air still smelled like it. Fresh, clean, like the weight that had been sitting on my chest for years had finally cracked and fallen away. They'd come for control. They left with a contract that bound them to the truth. 2 days after the ink dried, the envelope arrived. No return address, just my name, written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a check, the first installment of the back rent they owed me. Paperclipped to it was a folded note. "We hope we can put this behind us and be a family again. Love, Mom." I stared at it for a long time, not because it moved me, but because of how much it didn't. There was no apology, no ownership, just the hope that I'd let the past dissolve into something easier for them to live with. I placed the check in my desk drawer, the note I left folded, buried under it. That night, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I found my old external drive. I plugged it in, clicked through the folders, and there it was. Grandpa, Wave, MP4. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, warm and steady. "Hey, kiddo. If you're hearing this, I guess I'm not around anymore. But I want you to remember something. You're going to be okay, even if they never say they're sorry. Some people only value you when they can use you. And when you stop letting them, they call it betrayal. Let them. You just keep being you." I sat there for a long time, letting his words settle into the quiet. No shouting, no threats, just his voice, echoing in a space that finally belonged only to me. They had left me with nothing but a baby in my arms and a note telling me he was my problem. They were right about one thing. He was my problem. He was also my reason. And now, what about you? What's the most satisfying justice you've ever witnessed? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit like if this story made you feel that cold, quiet kind of victory.